Welcome again. There are still people joining every minute. Introduce yourself in the chat. Tell us where you are. I am Laura Buhler, the Executive Director of C100. We're a private, mission-driven, volunteer-driven nonprofit organization headquartered in San Francisco. Our vision is to help create Canada help Canada become ever more prosperous, more global, more entrepreneurial. And our mission is to galvanize the global Canadian tech diaspora to support, inspire, and advance Canadian entrepreneurship and entrepreneurial leaders. We aspire to build the preeminent global community of Canadians in tech. Our members include some of the most visionary entrepreneurs, operators, and VCs. If you are interested in supporting our mission and benefiting from our membership program, please do head to the C100 website and apply to join. Every member brings something rich and unique to the ecosystem and fuels C100's role in supporting global Canadians as they build high impact careers and remarkable organizations. C100's work is supported by an incredible community of supporting partners in Canada and in the United States. We would not be here if it weren't for the support of these organizations. Today, we're hosting a very special conversation with a friend of mine and friend of C100, John Stackhouse, on the subject of his newly released book called Planet Canada: How Our Expats Are Shaping the Future. Why is this so important? Well, the book is a call to action for Canada to think differently about its expats. It challenges the notion of brain drain and argues that Canada's diaspora, as he dubs our citizens abroad, as one of our nation's greatest untapped resources. John presently serves as Senior Vice President in the Office of the CEO at RBC, where he advises the executive leadership team and the board of directors on global economic, business, political, and social trends, and how those are affecting RBC, its clients, and its society at large. He comes from an illustrious 30-year career as a reporter and an award-winning journalist. He was editor-in-chief of the Globe and Mail from 2009 to 2014. He's won 5 national newspaper awards for his work that has spanned being a foreign correspondent, when he spent several years in the India Bureau, to his time as national editor, foreign editor, and editor of the Report on Business. John is a senior fellow at the Munk School of Global Affairs and Public Policy. John has authored at least 4 books that I'm aware of, and it is the subject of his latest one today that we're discussing: Canadian Expats and What to Do About Them. In connection with our event, the ebook edition of the Planet Canada book will be on sale today through next Friday, Friday the 18th. So if you'd like to read on your Kindle or your Kobo or your phone, you can purchase the ebook at the sale price on US stores or Canadian stores, depending on where you're based. There we go. So it's $10.99 in the US this week in recognition of this event, and $12.99 Canadian. So of course, hard copies are available too. I've got mine, but the ebook is available on sale this week. Without further ado, I'd like to kick off this discussion right now. John, thank you so much for writing this book. Thank you so much for it as a gift to Canada and to our expat community. Where I'd like to start is actually some of the crazy unknown history, at least it was unknown to me, of Canadians around the world. You share some incredible stories about the impact of Canadians from way back when until modern day. Can you just give our audience today a color of what the history of Canadian expatriates has been?
No, absolutely, Laura, and thank you for hosting this. Thanks for your leadership of the C100. We'll talk more about what the C100 can do to become the C1 million. I know a passion project of yours, but a genuine thanks to so many people on the call. I'm seeing your names pop up as you're signing in, and it's warming my heart because I feel like I'm with friends and really with fellow travelers. This book has been a very, very long journey, probably going back to my time living abroad, getting to know and meet Canadians in the most remarkable of places. But it really crystallized for me during the many visits I had to the Valley and long conversations I had with so many of you on the call, including you, Laura, who helped me and thank you for your patience, helped me understand the unique value of expats, not just in the Valley and the C100, but around the world, what it means to be Canadian. And we can talk about that because there is something very distinctive, how that has a value outside of Canada. And it's not just a feel-good kind of flag wrapping around your shoulders value. There's a real important value to the world, as well as to the work that so many people do. And then what we're missing as a country, because by God, it is just such a great opportunity, which compelled me to write this book and try to get various communities, including the government, excited about this opportunity that we continue to, in that unfortunate Canadian way, kind of turn away from, because we need it now more than ever, as we're seeing in the pandemic. And we can talk about how the world will be different coming out of the pandemic. We're going to need you folks way more than we even need you today, but we need to keep 10xing the relationship that we have with all of you. So to your question, Laura, which I love, because one of the things we really don't appreciate as Canadians is the history of expatriation, as it's called. Hate to tell you folks, you're not the first Canadians to have gone abroad. The C100 did not invent the Canadian diaspora. And I just love our history as a country and as a people. We're not nearly as proud of it. Like going back to the 1800s with people kind of running rum, literally, through the Caribbean, but also doing all sorts of incredible work in East Asia and South Asia and different parts of the world, in London, more than a century ago, building Canada's place in the world. We, in many ways, was Canadians who built Hollywood. It was the Canadians who helped develop vaudeville. And yes, it was the Canadians going back before the Valley as we know it today, who helped create a lot of the foundations of the Valley. You find Canadians a century ago at many of the world's great universities, and on and on and on. So I hope the book at least helps open people's eyes to how we have a long history. We should be proud of it, but also learn from it. There's reasons that you all leave, and they're not bad things. You're not running away from something. You're being pulled to something more often than not. And we need to find ways to get you to pull us along, because that's the missing link, if you will.
John, one of the much disputed figures is just how many of us, and I'm saying us because I am a Canadian based in California, how many of us Canadians do live abroad right now. Your book uncovers some pretty really never before seen, I think, data on this. Can you tell us about that? Like, how many of us are there, and how did you arrive at that?
Yeah, I absolutely. So I think it's at least 2 million, could be 3 million, but let's agree on, or I make the argument for 2 million plus. I put together a team at the Monk School in 2015, half a dozen grad students, and we did, or they did, a really good deep dive, not only on Canadian censuses and surveys, including by groups like the Asia Pacific Foundation of Canada, but they looked at censuses of other countries, including the US, that asks about your country of origin. So those were important signals that we were able to cross-reference. And then we asked Facebook, Jordan Banks, who was running Facebook at Canada at the time, a friend of the C100, got the company to run the numbers to show how many Canadians outside of Canada identify themselves as Canadian. And it was 1.8 million. So putting these things together, I thought, okay, that gives me confidence to say this is 2 million plus. And I know there's some naysayers who say, no, it's not that. There's not 250,000 of you in the Valley. You've seen some studies that say it's more like 75,000. I dug into those studies. They're too narrow, so they miss the breadth of the community that you folks know all too well. So I think it's 200 to 250 in the Bay Area, even more in the greater LA area, New York, London, Hong Kong, other big centers. But what we also found as we did this data digging is fast-growing populations of Canadians in other parts of the world: Dubai, Beirut, Malaysia, the Indian population centers, and also other centers in the U.S., Seattle, Boston, the greater Dallas area. So we need to, as a country, appreciate that there are Canadians everywhere, hiding in plain sight, as someone once remarked. And again, we got to take advantage of that.
Before I want to ask you more about how you think that we can take advantage of that. I first want to ask though more about these trends and these numbers that you're seeing, because it's really groundbreaking to see that level of research done into Canada's diaspora. You refer to it as the 11th province in your book. Why do you call it that?
Because it's well, partly to be mischievous, and that was a headline we came up at the Globe 10 years ago when we did a project on this, which was kind of the moment that helped me really deepen my understanding of some of the issues, which I hope we can get into around citizenship, the rights and privileges of overseas Canadians. Because if you recall at the time, and this was important to the foundation story of C100, there was a chipping away of expat rights, including the well-known one around voting, that were really strategically unwise, in my view. We argued this in the Globe, and I hope the book makes the case, because we need you. We need you on Team Canada and being active in Team Canada. So we need to appreciate, and some of these are, there's complex issues around taxation, around access to public services, healthcare, and education among them, that we need to at least have an adult conversation about. There's different ways at it, but let's just not try to sweep it away, and let's understand the cost-benefit analysis for not just for you as individuals, but for us as a country.
So let's get into that then, because I think that the crux of the issue of why people disagree on the numbers, for example, and you alluded to some of the chipping away of citizenship rights of expats, which for those of you who don't know, you can check out some of the Supreme Court rulings from actually last year on expat voting, which of course has been reinstated. But John, so then what is a Canadian? What's a Canadian citizen if we're abroad? What does that mean?
Well, there's multiple levels of that status, and you've got experts on this call in this area. But I think we need to be Catholic, small c Catholic, in our view of Canadians. There are people who maintain their citizenship and maintain residency even, or residential ties to Canada. But let's not limit it to that. There are people, including offspring of Canadians, that we need to be a little more mindful of as a country, as being part of the broader Canadian community. There's a term that other countries use called an affinity diaspora. The Irish are the most mischievous with this, because I think if you've ever drunk a pint of Guinness in your life, the Irish claim you as theirs. You're part of their diaspora. But I love the ambition, because they're a country of 8 million, 10 million people, and they're saying, if Ireland's going to matter, we need an affinity diaspora standing up for Ireland. So good on them for pushing it. We as Canada, we're 40 million people. That's the size of a big city now in China. How do we develop this affinity diaspora? You're thinking of that network power, 10xing, which so many of you really helped me understand, so that we have 400 million Canadians or affinity Canadians around the world. But back to your point about, because there are some important rights, responsibilities, and obligations that go with citizenship, including dual citizenship. So on voting, that was the craziest issue, because as we interviewed the former chief elections officer, who also ran data for us for this project, who said, the crazy part is most expats don't vote. But boy, they sure know it when you take away their right to vote. So I've said this to people in government, this actually doesn't make a material difference, except that you're pissing off a whole bunch of people. So up to you, but don't cut that tie, because whether they vote or not, they can have a value to the country. Maintaining your ties with a country. And there's all sorts of rules about this, and courts have had different views of whether you have to come back or maintain a property. I've started to make an argument since this book goes out that we need to better define, and maybe the C100 can help us with this, define what citizenship means in a digital age. There's been sort of three evolutions of citizenship in modern Canada. One was 1947. Citizenship before then used to be determined by London, Westminster, Britain, the mothership. 1947, after World War II, we took it away. We said, okay, we'll determine who a Canadian is. Then 1977, Trudeau OG puts out the Second Citizenship Act, which starts to get into multiculturalism, allows for dual citizenship, allows for greater rights of Canadians abroad. So that's when and immigration at the same time starts to take off. Then in 2010, we pull it back a little bit. Post 9/11, so security concerns. There was the Lebanon incident where suddenly 10,000 people needed to be evacuated from Lebanon, and Canadians were up in arms about that. So we tightened it up a little unwisely in my argument. But here we are now in the 2020s. Surely this is an opportunity for us to again redefine, which Canadians are good at, redefine what it means to be a citizen in the digital age. Estonia is the craziest example where all of us can apply for Estonian e-citizenship today, and odds are we'll get it. It's a bit of a kind of a marketing ploy, but I think about it a lot because I think they have challenged us to think about citizenship differently. And as Canadians, we can take it in our own direction, but ensure that all of you who have moved abroad and may stay abroad for the rest of your lives and may never set foot on Canadian soil again, that shouldn't diminish your identity as a Canadian, and also shouldn't diminish our connective tissue with you, including your right to carry a passport, your right for your children to come to Canada, because we need them if they so choose, and maybe, if not the right, the desire for us to put a bit more onus on you to help build Canada's place in the world.
So, John, that's awesome, and I think the voting is such a tangible example of how Canadians abroad stay in touch with Canada. I was really personally invested in that debate myself, I'm a single citizen, not hyphenated in any way, a Canadian citizen living in the United States, and is very civically engaged. And the loss of that vote, I grieved that very much. But also, I had family members who and friends who said, well, that makes sense. You don't live here. And then it kind of made me think, well, I guess it's not I didn't think, well, it's not so much do I deserve it or not, but it's like we need to rethink this whole idea of who can vote and who cannot vote. Because we have non-citizen residents of Canada as well. We have, in our cities and our provinces who cannot vote yet at, local elections or even, municipal levels and provincially. Federally, it gets into something else entirely. But those are questions that we have not answered yet as a country. I understand from reading your book and from following your tour of other kind of talks that you've given since the publishing of your book, that there are a ton of unanswered questions still around what to do about citizenship and Canadian identity. Can you tell us, like, the crux of your book actually is that, hey, there's a big opportunity here for us to seize as a country. We haven't hit quite on that yet. Tell us what we're missing out on right now. What's the opportunity that Canada is not seizing?
The first and maybe the biggest thing we are failing to appreciate is the transition of the world from an era of institutions to an age of networks. And we still have institutions, and they will continue to matter, like the United Nations, and they have a special place in the world. But the world is being increasingly and sometimes overwhelmingly shaped by networks. If you look at this year, the most powerful forces, other than the virus, in my argument, are Black Lives Matter, that's a network, and Greta Thunberg, she's leading a network. they are able to bring institutions, multinational companies, even governments to their knees. That's the power of network. And it's people power in a digital age, which is, and I learned a lot of this from folks on this call, but it's that 10x mentality that, and I make this argument with the brain drain, which just is a term that drives me crazy, because we need to see it as brain circulation, but it's the network power that makes it circulation. So when a Canadian leaves, it's not a loss of one, it should be a gain of 10. Because Laura, when you move to the Valley, you broaden the Canadian network to 10 more, and then 10 more, so 100,000 and so on. That is the network effect, which other countries like Israel and Singapore, but India, France, Britain are all taking advantage of. And here we are as Canada, one of the world's most multicultural, globally minded societies that is able to attract people from around the world decade after decade, and is getting even better at that. We're failing to recognize this network revolution that is going on. And why does that matter? It matters because our place in the world is shrinking. That's just basic math. Our share of global everything, GDP, population, is going to decline. That's okay. If we begin to think a bit more like a small power, rather than a middle power. So think like Israel, think like Singapore, think like Taiwan, which are all using networks of expats to advance their national national interests. That's such a great opportunity for us to think of these 2 million people, especially in significant places like the Valley, who can network for us, and to think beyond transactional issues like getting something approved by a local government and turning to you as lobbyists. So sometimes that's necessary, but that's kind of small ball. We need to think more strategically in terms of promoting Canada and helping, and here's the other challenge we need to come to grips with as a country, using you all as a source of intelligence, strategic intelligence for us as a country, which I know governments have used the C100 for, but we're leaving so much on the table by not turning to you to say, what don't we understand as a country? Help us.
What would that look like in practice? I mean, you've got 2 million people abroad. I mean, you've got 2 million people probably in Nova Scotia as well. Do all of them get asked for their opinions? Like, or how would we engage with this big diaspora in a way that...
So the 2 million people in Nova Scotia get asked every day through the parliamentary system, as well as other areas of democratic discourse. So I think their voices, generally, our voices are heard and digested into public decision making. To hear the voices of the 2 million, I've made a few recommendations. One is to start by recognizing you, right. Number one. But then establishing a channel into government, but beyond government. So I've suggested creating a unit in Rideau Hall under the Governor General to take it away from politics. Others have suggested creating a division within the Foreign Affairs Ministry or the Innovation Ministry or both to represent you and bring your voice in. So let's debate that. There's different options there. Then steal a page from what India does. And India's become really, really ambitious on this front, where they every 2 years bring their best and brightest back to, they have an award ceremony. France does the same thing. They have the equivalent of an Order of Canada for expats, something else I've recommended. But bring a couple of hundred back every couple of years to sit down with government leaders, but also academic leaders, corporate leaders, civic society leaders, to understand what's going on in the world. What a great resource for Canada and Canadians to hear from you. If you want to get really crazy about it, you can do what half a dozen countries like Italy do, which is give you seats in Parliament, let you elect people directly to Parliament. Okay, that's probably a bridge too far for Canada, but it's, I like the spirit of it.
Why is it too far? I'm curious. Like we have these ideas of what are extreme ideas. We also have a world that has been totally flattened by a global pandemic, and citizens everywhere who from my vantage point, more than ever before, are perking their ears up saying, I'm Canadian. What do I do? How do I help? How do I make my way in this
Yeah,
world? Who's to say what's extreme and what's not? Is there like
fair enough.
negative impact in Italy? I'm curious.
This is why I love talking to people in the C100, and why as a country we got to talk to you, because we convince ourselves that something is not possible, and then you just flat out say nonsense, nonsense. Who are you to say it's impossible? And damn it, you're right. I guess I'm fearful of having to open up the Canadian Constitution and all that goes with that. But there's workarounds. So one idea is, okay, if you don't want to restructure the House of Commons, what about allowing you to nominate representatives from different regions to this group at Rideau Hall? So every 2 years, the Canadians in the Valley pick 10 people to come to Ottawa, and the Canadians in Mexico do the same, and so on. And those become kind of the representatives who come back to not only share their insights on your behalf, but to take insights and ideas back, and probably lots of other better ideas than that to run with.
It's amazing to see what other countries are doing, and I have my own theories on why Canada maybe hasn't captured this opportunity yet versus other countries like Singapore that you're talking about, Israel. I'd like to hear your perspective on that. Why do you think we have been so slow to the punch on this?
Yeah, but I want to hear your perspective as well, Laura, because I genuinely, and from the group, because this is, I think there's probably some challenges for us as a people. So, number one, we are not as global a people, Canadians, as we like to be. The people on this call are exceptions. As I show in the book, and there's some really shocking data on this. Canadians don't like to move. So again, you're the exception. So as Chamath said, the misfits who wake up one day and realize ain't gonna work for me here, so I'm gonna go somewhere else. So I think we need to hold up the mirror a bit to ourselves and say, why don't we move? Why don't we like to leave our hometowns? Why do our even those who go to college and university tend not to want to go abroad during their time of study or after? Those are important challenges for us. Secondly, this carries through to corporate Canada, where we're not internationally minded enough, and we don't value global experience and global thinking enough. So that's a challenge on all of us in the corporate world. And then thirdly, government, our bureaucracy, tends to find reasons not to do things. So one of the issues that I've wrestled with is creating lists, databases of like who are the Canadians wherever. And immediately when I talk to people in government about it, they're like, oh, no, we can't keep lists. There's privacy concern. Which, yeah, like, let's get over ourselves, because hundreds, I spoke to hundreds of Canadians all over the world about this issue. And the reaction overwhelmingly was, I want to be on a list. Like, sorry, like,
right?
Exactly. I'm waiting for the phone call. Why does no one call? So let's not box ourselves out of that opportunity. There are ways of constructing lists and having opt-ins that we can be more creative with. Because other countries, very democratic countries, people always hold up China. No, we don't want to be like China. But I think we're okay being like Israel or Britain or France, which is really aggressive on this front. They know who's who, where, and how to stay in touch with them, and respecting all the privacy rules that you have in Europe, which are greater than ours.
Wow. Well, John, my theory is related to Canadian identity, and that all of those other things also being true. It's that I think one of the things that makes Canada just the greatest country in the world is our our freedom with the word citizenship. That as an immigrant country, when you get there, you can be Canadian, and we will all agree that that's a Canadian looks a little bit different today than it did yesterday, and it'll look different tomorrow than it does today because of our open immigration, our multiculturalism, and our version of secularism, which is really different from, places like France, for example. I think that it's the Canadian identity, at least since the 70s, maybe I'm a millennial, so I can only really speak in my own lifetime, but has been of one of people who come to Canada, and then that's what makes us Canadian, is that you can come from anywhere and now you're here. But when you leave, we don't really know what to do with you. And I think that trend is probably increasing with my generation and the generation coming after me, and the Gen Z or Gen Z, who are increasingly hyphenated, increasingly come from multicultural families who were born in other countries, and chose Canada as their home. And so it does seem to be already an intellectual challenge, I think, for the Canadian mind to think about people abroad as real citizens, as Canadians, which, if you have a reaction to that, I'd love to hear it. But my real question is, from your time abroad interviewing people for this book, what is a Canadian? Like, what is our identity in the world, and how do we define that?
Wow, that's such an epic, great question. What is a Canadian? It's not Tim Hortons. It's not hockey. And I put that question to every Canadian I could around the world, and would love to hear what others on the call think defines you as Canadian. I put it down to what we call mutual accommodation. It is an ability to work with difference. And I learned this from the many Canadians of different ages, but especially younger ones. And I think you raised such a good point I want to get to about the Gen Zers, because they're going to change the game in the coming decade for us out in the world. They grow up in a school system, in communities, and in a country that takes mutual accommodation for granted. It's just our habit. We don't have our own language. We don't really have our own food, except like maybe poutine and a few dishes. And we do have some quirks and distinctions of culture, but there isn't a clearly Canadian culture. As I say in the book, you hop into a taxi in Seoul or in San Francisco and say, take me to the Canadian part of town. The taxi driver is going to look at you, or the Uber driver is going to look at you with skeptical eyes. But the Uber driver is also going to say, oh, you're from Canada? My brother, my cousin, my sister, everyone in the world has an affinity with Canada. So while we don't have geographic neighborhoods, we do have a place in the world that transcends geography. And it's because of our ability to bridge difference, mutual accommodation. And that is a superpower for each of you as Canadians on this call. And I stress this to young Canadians: make sure that you start to value, test, and develop this ability to build bridges, because the world's going to need more of it. The market for bridge builders is going to be greater in the 2020s than even it was in the 2010s. And I learned this from people like Dominic Barton, who I interviewed a few times for the book when he was at McKinsey. He said, whenever I'm in a meeting anywhere in the world, I can usually spot the Canadian, because they're the person who asks questions and listens to the answers. He said, no, we're not the only ones. He said, the Dutch actually are pretty good at that as well. But I can tell from the accent, the Canadian from the Dutch. But it's a simple illustration of our willingness to listen, our ability to respect other cultures. There's a wonderful Canadian couple in Tokyo. They're YouTube stars, the Stowskis, who said, when we go to someone's door and they ask us to take our shoes off, we take our shoes off. We don't think it's weird. And that's kind of another simple story, but that's so Canadian. Like, okay, you take your shoes off here, well, we'll take our shoes off. Mutual accommodation And we take that for granted. The world, a more divided world, a more divisive world, a more isolated world coming out of this pandemic is going to desperately need those bridge builders, those people who ask questions and listen to the answers and bring people together. That's what Canadian means in the world. I think that's a superpower, as I say, for individuals, but it's also our quiet strength as a country that we need to mobilize a bit more. We don't have the collective strength with an army or all sorts of muscle out in the world, but we have this force of Canadians who are a quietly powerful force who can advance our interests. Because last point, like a divided world is bad for Canada. Yeah. A divided world, we do less well. We need a more united world, then we thrive. So, and back to the point about Canadians not kind of seeing the importance of expats. This is in our self-interest. We need you more than you need us, and we need you not as individuals but as a collective, bridging that world and ensuring Canada's place on those bridges is stronger.
Mm-hmm. John, I love that idea that you've introduced about mutual accommodation, because if you, on the surface, it sounds kind of like a soft generalization of Canadian culture, right? Our kind of, oh no, please, I insist you, no, I'm sorry, no, you're sorry. But it is actually bigger than that. And it's, you detail in your book several examples where that mutual accommodation has been featured in big negotiations. Canadians everywhere have been translators, bridge builders, as you call them, intermediaries, buffers between opposing parties. And it's pretty interesting when I started to think about that, being like, wow, maybe that really is a part of, even my identity that you just learn growing up in a multicultural society that embraces its multiculturalism. I would also, so I love that idea. I also want to ask you about diversity, because you also bring up in several, especially near the end of your book, when we're talking about this next generation, sort of coming up out of college years and now starting to work abroad as well, that they are increasingly multilingual, multicultural themselves. They may come from one parent who's Canadian born, one parent who's Iranian born, for example, and they've lived part of their life in Canada and abroad. You also paint that as a real opportunity for Canada, as kind of our gift to the world and how we look at that. Can you say a little bit more about the sort of demographic reality of Canadians today and how you see that playing out globally?
Yeah, no, it's our strategic moment, because we, if you map the demographics, the immigration wave that began in the late 80s, early 90s, when it went up to 1% of our population and has been pretty much there every year for the last 30 years, is now translating to a second generation. So all those people who moved to Canada in the 90s, people tend to immigrate when they're younger. They have babies. Those babies are now either millennials, but the Gen Zers, the hyphenated Gen Zers are hockey sticking in terms of population. They're just now coming out of college and university. And yes, they tend to be more highly educated than the general population. And for a variety of reasons, they tend to be more mobile. They're willing to move. Maybe it's because their families don't have the deepest roots in their communities. And there's a wonderful group of these hyphenated millennials and Gen Zers who I write about in London, England, who opened my eyes to this. They all came from, their families came from every part of the world. And here they had gone back out into the world. And as I was sitting around a table with them, looking at them, I realized, my Lord, our diaspora is so unique out in the world because it looks like the world. And there's no other country, maybe Australia, maybe England to a degree, but not, it's only a degree, has the same expat population that looks like the world. And it's not a matter of them going back to the ancestral country. It's going to different key parts of the world, including the Valley, and bringing that global mindset that kids of immigrants tend to have, bringing that sense of mutual accommodation, respecting difference, which kids of immigrants tend to have. Plus, it's a generation that is just much more open, and it's a generation that is born networked. They're pretty much born with a phone in their hand. So this concept of network is just part of their DNA. So how do we think, as we have a moment now to do something about it, to harness the 20-somethings, to get them out of Canada once it's safe to get out into the world, networking, building their own networks, but connecting us with that world for the decades ahead.
Incredible opportunity. Thank you so much, John. We're going to go over to some questions, and just as a reminder to anybody who joined kind of partway through the call, we're going to unmute you if your name is called. Please ask your question quickly and succinctly so we can get through a few with John. Lots of incredible chat action happening in the Zoom chat and in the Q&A. We're going to go first to Chris Albinson. And for those of you who do not know the history of C100 on the line, Chris is actually the co-founder of the C100 itself. And there is actually a chapter in the book dedicated to the C100. So thank you so much, John, for telling that story. Chris, over to you.
Hey, John, congratulations on the book launch. Just a fantastic read. Really thrilled to be doing the session today. Had a quick question for you that might be a little bit topical, which is the herd of intellectual capital is really exiting Silicon Valley, unlike anything we've seen since it left Boston in the early 90s. And it seems like Canada left 2019 as one of the prime places, especially Toronto, to capture that movement. And we've totally dropped the phone. And it seems like Texas grabbed the brass ring right out of our hands. Curious as your thoughts as to why, and do you think it's too late for Canada to, refocus on this economic engine of innovation?
That's wow. Thanks, Chris. And just for everyone listening, Chris played an extraordinary role in not only the creation of the C100, but helping a lot of people, me included, understand the power of expat networks. And in trying to authenticate or verify the C100's origin stories, I was reminded of that line that failure is an orphan and success has many parents. And there were many parents of the C100, but I hope the story that I was able to put together for the book gives an accurate portrayal of how individuals like Chris and Anthony really made things happen, but how government can also play an important role. But it takes very special people and sometimes a lot of patience to make that happen, which we probably need for the challenge, Chris, that you're identifying. So, it's never too late, but I was reading the journal interview with Elon Musk overnight about his shift to Texas and thinking, that's exactly that. What maybe a lost moment for Canada, because he could have picked any Canadian center rather than Texas, arguably. So did we make the case to him? He's Canadian, or at least partly Canadian. So we're not, I don't want to underplay the great effort that a lot of Canadian diplomats and Canadian government leaders play in trying to draw star talent back to the country. That's critical. We need to do more of that. But we need to sort of come at these situations from multiple approaches. It isn't just a phone call from someone in government to someone. It's working their network to try to find out what the points are of opportunity and what the advantage would be for them to move, or for them to move their whole network here. I would then, though, add that just because someone doesn't move here doesn't mean that they are a loss to Canada. Maybe it's better for them to be here, maybe not. So how are we working with Elon Musk, for instance, given his association with Canada, to ensure that if he's in Texas or wherever, that Canada's interests are being enhanced? And that's just a famous name to cite. There's thousands more like him that we should be working with, whether they're here or wherever, to keep them Canadian and make sure Canada's connecting with them to a world of opportunity.
Excellent, John. And actually, we're going to end up going to a couple of to at least one question asker who happens to be one of these mysterious repatriated citizens as well. Great answer. Next, though, we're going to go to Kim Fennell. Kim. Do we have Kim on the line? Okay. If not, we're going to move to George Babu. Oops. Are we having some trouble finding folks here? All right, well, I'm going to read off Kim's question.
Kim should be able to speak.
Oh,
Yeah.
Kim should be able to speak. Okay, Kim, can you hear?
Sorry about that.
Awesome.
Hey, John, thanks again for the book. Great book. You touched on this a little bit earlier. I just wanted to dive in a little bit deeper on the Canadian government. I mean, I left in '91, UK, and I've been working for Silicon Valley companies for over 30 years. I've never had any outreach from the Canadian government. I mean, you know, obviously we have C100. Even our fellow alma mater Queens has reached out and asked for help. But the Canadian government never has. And I'm just wondering, is there a reason in your mind behind it? Are they just shy about it? They're not motivated to do it? But why do you think they've never reached out to anybody to ask for help?
Yeah, it's such a great question. And I sadly heard it from all sorts of incredible people in different places who are waiting literally for the phone to ring. And I don't think it's deliberate, but it is primarily because we don't have a strategy and a focus on it. People are not held to account for it. And so that's number one. But number two, we're just, as a country, not opportunistic enough. Again, back to that small power thinking that we need of realizing every day we got to wake up a bit paranoid and know that the world didn't wake up this morning thinking about Canada. So how do we get the world thinking about Canada? Well, you know, we can buy ads, but probably we don't have enough money to do it on that. How do we call people like you and say, can you help with this and that, and how can we help you? Which is such an important part of the network effect. Is it's got to be two-way. So understanding what you need, how do we connect you with opportunities? This is why we need more prominence for this in government, and why I recommend the Governor General take this on. But if not the Governor General, someone else with a stature to say, this is really important, like mission critical to the country, to have the resources to take it on year in, year out, decade in, decade out, and not worry about government changes. So it's yeah, go ahead.
All right, John, what you just said about government asking not only can you help, but how can we help you? Now, one of the title of your book itself is, how expats are shaping the future. Maybe it's not the title, but somewhere we talk about it as being Canada's, perhaps Canada's greatest untapped resource. And I will admit, in my line of work, we often hear things from partners on the Canada side as this is a resource to be mined. It's a resource to be tapped. And perhaps that kind of anecdote makes this whole idea of diaspora management more palatable to the Canadian mind. But what you just said is also, how can we help you? And so how is that actually, I realize I'm going off piece here by not going into the questions, but so Kim's never been asked to help by the Canadian government. But has the Canadian government ever said to Kim, we want to help you be more successful, even if it's abroad? Is that actually something that you think should be happening?
Yeah, absolutely, because that's how you build your networks and community of communities. We often try to, as we should, figure out how to help Canadian companies abroad, but how do we think about helping Canadian individuals, especially in bigger kind of mission-driven pursuits? Because if they succeed, Canada will benefit.
Right. Let's go to George Babu. George is one of our, yes, he's the repatriated one that I was telling you about. He's recently moved back to Canada. George is asking to be unmuted, please.
Oh, there we go. Oh, sorry, I'm back. There I am. Thanks, Laura. Hi, John. Love the book.
Hey,
Love
George.
the ideas. Resonating a lot with the ideas. Question I had is, you mentioned that Canada does well in a united world and doesn't do well in a divided world. I wondered if you could dig in more into that. Why specifically in both sides? The reason I asked the question is, Ian Bremmer and a bunch of other folks are talking about the trend for the next decade being the deglobalization of the world, and more,
Yep.
maybe not superpower conflict, but minor power conflict. It seems like the world we're getting into. So, what is the risk to us as Canadians?
Yeah, there's serious risks. So we don't have the negotiating power. We typically, historically, have had to kind of draft behind the United States or maybe some other powers, but principally the U.S. on all major issues, and that is more challenging today for reasons you all know than in generations past. We need multilateral approaches to both the rule of law and to the governance of the world, because we don't have bilateral negotiating power. We also are a country that connects well with every part of the world, partly because of who we are, of that sense of mutual accommodation. So we don't want to be, I don't think as people, but strategically, we also don't want to be part of a fortress, because that's just not our nature, but also not in our interests. So how do we, if there isn't a return to multilateralism, and Biden is going to be more multilateral for sure, but I wouldn't think we're going to have some kind of revolution in late January and a return to everything multilateral. If you accept Ian's argument that it's going to be a decade of deglobalization, then we need people like the people on this call more than ever for that soft power, because government to government negotiations are going to probably be more contentious, a bit more elbows up. That's okay. We can we're good at having dealing with other governments despite our small size, but simultaneously we need people power, and Canadians in different parts of the world, as well as well-connected Canadians here, like you, George, who can connect us with non-government actors in all parts of the world. This is so important as we deal with contentious relations, let's say in China or Saudi Arabia. In both those countries, and there's other examples, there's lots of Canadians in those countries who are unheralded, even unknown, who are very well connected, respected, who can have influence. Not over a particular issue. They're not going to negotiate on our behalf necessarily. We may not even want that, but they maintain the long-term strategic relationship between people. So if the Chinese government is angry at the Trudeau government, or the Trudeau government's angry at the Saudi government, the Chinese people are not angry with the Canadian people. We have that second track of connectivity, which we'll need decade after decade.
Thanks so much, John. We have really limited time, but we have 3 incredible questions that we want to keep to. We're next going to go to Shahram Yousefi. Shahram from the Bay Area.
Thank you so much, Laura and John, both of you, for putting this fantastic discussion for us today. So John, I'm a tech founder and academic, so I sit sort of at the intersection of the two, and I'm feeling that I'm getting pulled in both directions. And this is for a school that you don't know much about, Queen's University in Kingston. And so I'm associate dean of corporate relations out of Bay Area. So I've been living in Bay Area for the past 4.5, 5 years. And my number one focus is to find opportunities for our students, engineering students in particular, to accelerate their careers. And on that note, I want to ask you this question. In chapter 14 and 15, you talk specifically about the student issue and the brain drain. And I want to know, in the past couple of months, many things have changed. The pandemic, barring a cliche here, has changed many assumptions that we've had. What would you say today are the do's and don'ts of us plugging our students into places like Bay Area, other centers of growth in terms of careers? And what do you think is additive and what do you think is subtractive?
Great question. I don't want to consume too much of our limited time with the answer, so I'll do probably injustice to it. But quickly, not seeing it as a negative for students to go abroad after graduation. In fact, we need more of that to gain international experience, to plug into those global networks that we need. Where we've got a real weakness as a country is with people who return in valuing that global experience. I've heard countless people since the book came out who've moved back saying, "My Lord, I can't tell you how underappreciated my international experience is." In fact, some people say they couldn't get a job because they didn't have Canadian experience. So I think our universities can help with that, both getting people out, which is important, but upping our collective appreciation of that global experience as they come back. Secondly, and I know this is hard for universities, think beyond the institution's interest. So whether it's Queen's or McGill or other schools, yes, you've got a primary duty to your institution, but how are you also using your networks of alumni, our networks, to enhance Canada's place? Because we'll all benefit from that. And this is where we're not seizing an opportunity, because alumni networks are probably our most powerful networks right now. How do we feed more Canadian content, Canadian thinking into those networks? So it's both, let's say, Queens, but also Canada that's connecting with the folks you're working with.
Awesome. Thanks so much, John. We want to go 2 minutes over, if that's okay, because we have a couple of people that we would like to get to here. The next question goes to Atlee Clark, who you know well. Atlee, for those who don't know, was the founding executive director of the C100. Now leads a big mandate at Shopify out of Ottawa. Atlee?
Hi, thank you, Laura. Thanks, John. Can't wait to read the book. Yes, it was one of those repatriated Canadians. One thing that I've noticed since being back is, some people that haven't lived in Canada for a long time get this sort of outdated view. They sort of are like, if they left 10 years ago, they see Canada as it was 10 years ago. And I was working with a Canadian company, work with the C100, and it even happened to me. How do we better arm the diaspora with good data and the realities on the ground beyond just if they're reading the Globe and Mail every day?
Thanks, Atlee. And you are a key part of the book and the C100 story, because you're such a good example of kind of that two-way flow of Canadians that I think we'll see more of. So maybe that connects with the previous question, that we need to ensure, whether it's through alumni networks or corporate networks or personal networks, that there is a constant flow of Canadian, it's not information as in kind of updates of laws that are changing, that has a value, but helping the network and networks understand how the country is evolving, because then you become our best ambassadors to be able to say, and not asking you to talk about a certain policy or where the government stands on this, but just as being Canadian storytellers. I think we underappreciate that we're actually a really good nation of storytellers, have historically been that way, and our diaspora is a terrific group of storytellers. How do we arm you with the Canadian story every day so that you can better tell it? That comes back to what government should be doing, because I think this ultimately falls to government, which is to create the resources, allocate the resources to ensure that information, not in a PR way, but that information and thinking is flowing out to the diaspora, that your stories are being shared with each other, not just within the C100, but you know what Canadians are doing in Shanghai or Seoul, and that we are getting your stories back, not just as feel-good stories or the hero stories, those are terrific to have, but the real insights, that you're on the front lines of kind of everything that's going on in the world. We need to learn from that. So there's a real circularity of storytelling that is there for the taking.
That's a great point. It goes all ways. Our last question is from Adam Chevelle. Adam Chevelle, you should be able to share your question now. Adam joins us from, I think, Mill Valley.
Thanks, Laura, and hi, John. Thanks for your time this morning. I'm really looking forward to reading this book. You've actually touched on this already with George Babu's question about sort of soft power and international institutions and multilateralism playing to Canada's strengths, whereas real power and kind of international kind of power politics between countries is a disadvantage to Canada's ability to impact international relations. And my question really is, are there ways in which Canada and Canadian expats in particular can work to influence countries in the sort of real politics sphere where Canada traditionally is disadvantaged? Like, are there ways that the expats in countries like China or the US or Russia or other places that are asserting, pretty significant dominance in global politics, are there ways in which our sort of mutual accommodation approach of being Canadian can lend a hand to influencing those actors on the global stage?
No, it's a great question, especially to maybe to end off on, because this is our opportunity, but onus for the years ahead. We don't want expats being hardcore diplomats out there negotiating for prisoner releases or negotiating trade agreements on our behalf. We have professional diplomats who can and should do that. But the soft negotiating, soft power is really, really important. So how do we understand who you are, where you are, and who you know, and ensuring that you are maintaining open conversations, open dialogue, and positive dialogue with those people. So China is a great example. I profile a fantastic architect named Rafer Wallace in the book, who moved from McGill, from Montreal 20 years ago, and is now, he's in China probably for the rest of his life. His two kids were born and raised there. He wants them to be Canadian, but he's got a multinational business that he's founded in Shanghai that has operations in many different countries, but he's going to stay there. Rafer has all sorts of contacts at kind of in all places in China that we need to take advantage of. And it's not in some kind of underhanded way. He'd be totally above board on this. It's just he can talk to people who respect him and respect him as a Canadian individual to advocate for Canada's long-term interests, not to get into tactical negotiations, but to help key people wherever they are in China. And there's 1,000 people like Rafer in China who can do this. But this gets back to the previous question about helping you stay informed of how Canada's evolving, to just be able to say, here's the Canada that you may not appreciate, and here's some opportunities for you with Canada, and how can I be a liaison or a connector? That's back to the network effect. How do we make you better connectors and help connect you as well with opportunities here, but with Canadians wherever they may be.
Thank you so much, John. We're going to wrap there. Excellent way to close. Thank you, everybody, for joining us this morning. I'm going to plug it one more time. This is Planet Canada. You can get your copy anywhere where books are sold. That includes in Canada or in the United States. You can pick your favorite global tech giant or your favorite independent bookstore to order this awesome book. And again, it is going to be discounted this week through next week on the ebook version in recognition of this call that you did here with C100, John. John, thank you so much. We'll let you go now. And thank you all so much for joining us from around the world and making this an excellent discussion.
Well, thank you, Laura. Stay safe, everyone. Happy holidays, and really look forward to being with you all in person before too long. Thank you.
Happy holidays, John.